Lego Marvel, you're good, but you could be better. Hey guys, it's Holly. So today I wanted to show you all some more upgrades, fixes, and Photoshop in order to make these figures just the best that they could possibly ever be. Now this is the second version of this video that I have done for Lego Marvel. I've also done it twice for Lego Harry Potter, so I will leave them linked in case you guys haven't checked them out already. But here is the selection of figures that we will be tackling today, and there are some pretty major changes and fixes that can be done with these guys in order to make them even better. And I've been dying to make these changes because I really wanted to put them up on my shelf already, so I'm really excited to share these with you. I also wanted to try and include as many variations to these upgrades as possible because, as we all know, some parts and figures are a lot more expensive and harder to get a hold of than others. Now the first figure on the chopping block for upgrades is Angelina Jolie's Cena from the brand new Marvel movie, The Eternals. Now overall, this face, while it's a reuse of Mantis and Bellatrix and all that, I think that this face works really well for Angelina Jolie. Honestly, I don't think you could get any better, but just this minifigures printing and hairpiece in general, I feel like could be so much better. Firstly, from Lego, I would have loved to have an actual physical skirt piece, and unfortunately, there's not one that quite matches. However, I do think that there is a much better fit for her hair. Now in the film, Angelina Jolie does have a tiara, so just like this hairpiece, we're gonna have to suspend our sort of imagination for a second here. But the hairpiece I actually want to swap it to is the Harry Potter Luna Lovegood hair. I just think firstly, the length matches so much better, but also it's got a lot more texture and sort of definition, and I think it suits a lot better. While the shorter hair is definitely a lot more practical for fighting, I don't think it matched her character very well compared to this one. It just looks so much better in my opinion. However, you do have to sacrifice a little bit of the back printing, but for me, overall, I don't mind. I would rather have a better looking hairpiece than be able to see the back printing, which I can't see anyway. Next up is Dr. Stephen Strange from the Spider-Man Sanctum workshop set. Now, overall, this figure's alright, but I just feel like it's not amazing. And for me personally, a lot of it comes down to the cape. For other people, the cape, you might personally prefer it, and that's fine. But for me personally, I'm just not a huge fan of how it actually looks on Doctor Strange himself. So in order to fix him and upgrade him, the first thing I would do is buy yourself another Peter Parker Spider-Man CMF. And as a bonus, because most of you have probably bought the set, you can use this head to put on your Spider-Man suit, so that's a big plus. And what you want to do is actually swap out the cape. So big bonus here, you get an extra Spider-Man suit, a head for Peter Parker, as well as the cape to swap out with Doctor Strange. I'm really seeing no disadvantages here. And there he is with his whole cape swapped out, and like I said, now you just have a regular Spider-Man suit. However, for me personally, I feel like there is still a bit more that can be done, and in order to do this, unfortunately, you will have to have the very expensive 2018 Doctor Strange. Now, I've said before, I much personally prefer the detailing and the printing on this figure. Now, I know that like a lot of Marvel figures, this is based off concept art and didn't actually look that way in the film, but to me, the torso printing is way more detailed and intricate than the one from the Sanctum workshop, specifically with the Eye of Agamotto. So for me personally, what I would do is just take this figure instead and change over the hair pieces. But for this video's sake, what I actually want to do is swap out the head. This head to me just looks a bit too happy for Doctor Strange. I mean, besides the scene where he's winking and he has his fox cup, I really don't think that this captures Benedict Cumberbatch all that well. However, the hairpiece certainly does. So in order to upgrade him, I'm going to decapitate this Doctor Strange and just swap over their heads. There we go, and now he looks a little bit more Sorcerer Supreme-y, less happy dad-like. And this, I think, for a lot of people is probably going to be your ultimate Doctor Strange. Now, one important thing about getting that bonus Spider-Man figure is that if you are like me and you'd much prefer this sort of pattern for Doctor Strange, you can still swap out that cape so that you no longer have this spongy one and you have that more sort of stiffer, sort of starchy type of cape, which I personally much prefer. Next up, we have Okoye, and you know, you'd think with the Dora Milaje's outfit that she would be this super detailed, really pretty looking figure. Nope, we just get one printed torso. Quite disappointing. Would have loved some sort of skirt piece or leg printing of any kind. It's just so disappointing considering what a great outfit she had. Now, unfortunately, in the leg department, there's really not too much you could do. However, one thing that you can do is steal some of Ninjago's armor in order to give her some nice shoulder pads. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean this handy dandy Lego Ninjago piece, which funnily enough, you can actually stick some swords into the back. Not that that's very helpful for her spear, but it just adds a tiny bit more detail. But really, all you want is the shoulder pads. If you're a brave soul, unlike myself, potentially you could try and cut off this sword holder if you really wanted to. However, I don't like destroying my Lego pieces. I would rather keep them as is. So all I'm going to do is slot this little shoulder pad piece on, stick her head back on, or not. And just like that, she looks a lot more like herself. And funnily enough, this is what a lot of Okoye custom figures have done. They've actually used this piece in order to upgrade and make those custom figures. So if all of those companies can do this for Okoye, you know what? Yeah, so am I. So if all of those companies could do this for Okoye, and you know, we can do it ourselves by just buying either some Ninjago sets or, you know, stealing some of the ninja's armor, then I don't know why Lego couldn't, because already I think she looks so much nicer. Next up, we have the best Spider-Man cinematic character to ever grace our screens, and that is Gwen Stacy. Now, Gwen, I was, you know, disappointed with when the Bugle launched, but it wasn't until I was watching Tommy C. Brix's Daily Bugle series that it was really brought to my attention how bad she is. While this is just sort of like a regular sort of comic book version, I personally feel that it doesn't quite match Gwen Stacy's hair really, besides the hair color from the comics, let alone the Amazing Spider-Man movies, or really her outfit. It just doesn't feel very preppy enough. It feels very bright and colorful, whereas I feel like Gwen was more classy and just sort of preppy and all dressed up type of thing. So the first thing that I really want to do is actually steal the sort of Hermione Granger hairpiece, and the only appearances of this, unfortunately, are the exclusives DC Fandom Supergirl figure, as well as the sort of pajama girl from series 21, which is where I got this hairpiece from. It's not the cheapest thing ever, but I think it does suit Gwen really nicely. You sort of get her fringe. I just feel like it looks and suits her hairstyle that appears in a lot of the Spider-Man media so much better. And you could leave her like this if you really wanted to, but I just personally don't really like the outfit all too much. So what I've done is actually taken a plain black pair of legs as well as Hermione's torso from the Harry Potter Series 2 CMF, and I just want to swap that out in order to make her seem a bit more preppy, a bit more classy, may I even say elegant. I just feel like this suits Gwen's sort of personality a lot better, in my opinion at least. Next up is skinny Steve Rogers from the What If set. Now, overall, I don't have too many complaints about this figure. I mean, I feel like the face could have been a bit more Steve Rogers-y, but I think the cheekbones definitely work to represent that more skinnier Steve. However, since, you know, Steve is skinny, and before he took the serum, he was a lot shorter, I personally don't think that these full-size legs quite work as well as they should. Now, as far as I'm aware, or at least as far as I have in my collection, I do not have the mid-sized legs in this olive green color. However, I know that they do exist in dark tan. So what I'm going to do for Steve is actually give him a little bit of a height reduction and stick on some of those mid-sized legs in order to make him seem a bit more pre-serum-y. Especially since in a lot of scenes he was a lot shorter than majority of the adults. I feel like this works a lot better, and while the dark tan technically doesn't match the jumpsuit perfectly because, you know, it's not olive, I think it does still match pretty well considering it sort of blends in with the color scheme of the actual jumpsuit itself and just makes him again look a lot more pre-Captain America-esque. Also from that set, we have Stealth Suit Captain Carter. Now, just in general, I think something you should probably do is purchase yourself another Captain Carter, because for the set itself, you can just completely swap out the minifigure, considering the stealth suit wasn't even in that episode. But also, you can use Captain Carter in order to upgrade your stealth suit, Peggy. Now, the big bonus to this too, similarly to Doctor Strange, is that you can actually rip off Captain Carter's legs and her arms in order to give them to the Age of Ultron Steve Rogers, and then all you need left is her head as well as the shield. And I remember when watching that final episode, I was really confused to where this shield actually came from, considering she had the exact same shield as she did in that first What If episode. So in order to sort of make her look a bit more accurate, I want to swap out that shield and then of course swap out her head so that it looks a lot more sort of Hayley Atwell Peggy. If you really wanted to as well, you could swap out the hair to try and find something more accurate. However, I think lengthwise and for the most part style, this hairpiece does work pretty well. And lastly, just to top all of this figure off, if you have some spare blue and brown legs lying around, I would personally swap those out too, just to give her a tiny bit more detail. Personally, I wouldn't use the ones from the Captain Carter figure just because they have that tiny tinge of red on them, whereas the stealth suit does not really have that. Next up, we have Thor God of Hammers from Age of Ultron, and there are a few things that I would really like to do with him, some of which we can do with physical Lego parts, others would either require customization or, in my case, Photoshop. So the first thing I want to do is actually swap out Thor's hairpiece. Firstly, the color is just a tiny bit too bright for me and it doesn't even match his face to begin with, but that's quite lucky actually, considering the hairpiece that I want to use off the 80s Rockstar CMF also doesn't match his beard. This is also the same hairpiece as old Luke, so if you don't have the 80s Rockstar, you can steal it off of him, and then we're just gonna swap that out in order to give him his much longer, sort of luscious locks that he has in Age of Ultron, as well as Thor the Dark World, and even the beginning of Thor Ragnarok. Now, one thing that I would absolutely love to do with Thor is actually swap out his cape to the Mandalorian style one in either a dark red or even just keeping this regular red. However, that piece unfortunately does not exist, so unless you want to get some fabric dye and dye a Lego cape, which I feel like is a big waste of money, you can't really do that. However, if you do have a spare cape lying around that you wouldn't mind cutting up, aka you buy yet another duplicate Spider-Man CMF, then maybe you could customize it to make something more like that. So here's a sort of mock-up of me erasing the cape there in order to make it just a tiny bit smaller to sort of match the style of Age of Ultron and Dark Worlds, etc., just a tiny bit better. Our next figure is from the Daily Bugle, and that is Black Cat. Now, something that I've wanted to do is sort of upgrade her legs for a while now. Now, the initial idea that I had was actually to use Sylvester's legs from the Looney Tunes CMF, and the other idea I had was actually the cat costume girl from Series 18. Now, Tommy C. Bricks recently did this in a video where he upgraded a bunch of Daily Bugle figures, so I finally got to see what it was like. And for his variation as well, he did upgrade the arms. However, personally, I much prefer the more slicked back black version, so instead I'm just gonna swap out the legs. But in case you did want to see what the figure looks like with those cat arms instead, here is a clip right now. Now, this version works pretty well because you sort of get all that little hair detail there. However, it's not sort of overly done. It's very similar to just sort of the dual molded legs, but it just makes it seem a bit more alive, especially when you've got the fur on her collar there. Now, the other option I did mention is actually using Sylvester's legs from the Looney Tunes CMF. The only difference to this one is the fur printing is very different. However, it does continue around on the side, which is a big win, but you've also sort of got that nail printing at the bottom. So if you don't have access to that cat costume, or it's just a lot easier in order for you to find a Sylvester since Looney Tunes are still on shelves, you could do this option too. However, I personally think that the cat costume legs work just a tiny bit better than these ones, purely because of just how cartoony that sort of fur print looks. Next up is the Infinity War / Guardians Volume 2 Star-Lord. Now, there's a couple of things that I would like to upgrade this figure with. Firstly, I want to give him that updated Chris Pratt face, which is featured on the 2021 Star-Lord, as well as just majority of the Jurassic World figures. It's not a particularly expensive face to find, and I just think it looks a lot more like Chris Pratt than the original sort of Chris Pratt face did. And if you really wanted to, you could probably stop there. However, with the recent Marvel CMF, we did get Star-Lord T'Challa, who had these really lovely dual molded legs with actually some rocket booster prints on the side, which is personally why I want to swap it out, because I really don't think that those green lines really add all too much, but those rockets personally do. And luckily too, if you do pick up a secondary Star-Lord T'Challa, you can have an extra T'Challa face to stick on a Black Panther figure, and then you can use these legs on your Star-Lord like so, and just make him look a bit more sort of fancy. Another budget version for this is just not swapping out the Chris Pratt head at all and just keeping his little helmet on him at all times. However, if you still want to upgrade this figure, what I would personally do is try and get your hands on the original Guardians of the Galaxy Star-Lord helmet. I just think that the eyes look a tiny bit better without all of the stars around them, but even then, I think this one works really well if you can't get a hold of that one. Next up, we have Shuri from Infinity War, and this one really isn't too dramatic of a change, but it's changing up Shuri's hairstyle. Now, firstly with Shuri, I personally don't like Lego using the black hair pieces for her. I just think that the color doesn't completely match. When watching the movies, Shuri's hair looks a lot closer to dark brown than it does black, but also with this one, and I imagine this is purely down to concept art, and is the fact that just Shuri's hair don't look like that. Now, one piece that is pretty common in a lot of city sets as well as friend sets is actually these two space buns, which luckily and conveniently come in dark brown, so you can just pop off that hairpiece and swap that over, and already she looks sort of a lot more like herself from Infinity War. Unfortunately, that programmer hairpiece though from the newer versions of Shuri doesn't come in dark brown, so currently she's sort of still gonna have black hair, but at least Infinity War can look a tiny bit more accurate. Next up, we have Katie from Shang-Chi, and there's a few different things that I wanted to try out and test with her, and I feel like it's just a matter of picking whichever combination works best. Now, the first thing I want to do is get rid of this crossbow. Katie shoots with an actual bow and arrow, and I wish I had one of them lying around so that I could actually give it to her, but that is the first thing I would do. This crossbow really doesn't count. The second thing I want to do is actually swap out her hair. Now, I feel like without sort of changing the face, one thing that you could do is actually give her that sort of same Monica hair piece. I mean, it would match her Monica face, because I feel like Awkwafina's hair in Shang-Chi was a lot shorter. Now, admittedly, her hairstyle in that final battle was a half up, half down. However, if you just sort of wanted to make your own custom Katie, maybe this one would suit a little bit better. But sort of going back to the faces, while I think this one suits Awkwafina pretty well, there is another face that sort of follows the similar pattern of having quite a large smile that I think works quite well. And from when I've tried it, I think it works best with this hairpiece, and that is actually Edna Mode's from Disney Series 2. Now, I don't know what it is about this face. I think it's just the extremely wide smile, but it reminds me so much of Awkwafina, and it also means that you're not sort of reusing the same face over and over again. You've also got this sort of more shocked and scared expression that you can use for when she's in a car chase or she's about to kill the dragon. However, it does make her look a tiny bit older, whereas the smile one I think works really well, and I don't know what it is, just that smile reminds me of Awkwafina. Now, one thing with Edna's face though to keep in mind is that she doesn't actually have the same sort of eyelashes, so it does look a bit weird in terms of the eye front, and that's purely because, you know, this figure had this giant hairpiece, but I think the smile works pretty well. Maybe it's something you want to try, maybe it's something you don't. However, I would definitely probably get yourself one of these hair pieces in order to swap it out so you can sort of have like Battle Katie or regular Katie, because I definitely think the hair works so much better in terms of length and just in terms of Katie throughout more of the film. And last but not least is the 2004 Spider-Man figure based upon Tobey Maguire. Now, this is probably going to be a bit of a controversial one, and honestly one of the steps I'm too scared to do, so I'm going to use Photoshop instead, but it's actually giving this Spider-Man some dual molded legs. Give him some boots. Now, Tobey's suit had pretty dominant red boots at the very bottom, and I feel like if this figure was made in this day and age, he would definitely have dual molded legs, so that is something that I wanted to try out. Now, in an ideal world, you would keep this hip piece. However, since this figure I bought was used and is very, very old, I'm very hesitant to actually sort of rip the legs off, so I'm just gonna Photoshop it for you. But before I do that, one thing that you could do is potentially just give him the sort of dual molded boot piece to begin with, just like that. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could take the extra step and make that hip piece red as well if you've got some spare red legs lying around. Unfortunately, I do not, hence the legs sort of looking like this, but it sort of just makes him feel a bit more detailed. However, this version of Tobey Maguire's outfit I think is definitely the peak version, and especially, you know, when I make it on Mecha Bricks, it makes me really happy. But just keep in mind that this figure is an old one. It's definitely not made to the same quality standards as we see these days, so be careful if you are going to try and rip that Spider-Man's legs off. But for now, we just look at the beauty of Photoshop and see what could be, or what could have been. I don't really know the correct way to say it in this sort of context here. So those are all 12 of the Marvel figure upgrades. Some I definitely think work better than others, but as a whole, I just think these are a big step up from LEGO's original versions. I mean, they're limited to budget issues. However, we have access to a much wider catalog than they do. Let me know which one out of these upgrades was your favorite, and if you are planning on doing any of these yourself. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel down below. And until next time, guys, I'll see you later.